Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. There's a lesson in Abdul El-Sayed's victory in Michigan the Democrats should not miss, and it is bigger than one candidate, one primary, or even one Senate race. The lesson is that voters are hungry for a politics that sounds like it understands their lives. They are tired of being told to be patient while rent rises, healthcare costs rise, groceries cost more, and their sense of security shrinks. They are tired of politicians who speak in carefully tested phrases but seem incapable of naming what is making life harder. And they are tired of a Democratic Party that can sometimes look more comfortable managing decline and fighting for people. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed did not win because every Michigan Democrat suddenly agrees with him on every issue. He won because he gave people a reason to believe that somebody was willing to say plainly that the system is not working the way it should and that it can be changed. That matters because Michigan is not a symbolic state. It is a battleground. It is a state with major cities, union households, working-class suburbs, rural communities, college towns, communities of color, immigrant communities, religious voters, independents, and people who have moved back and forth between the two parties during their lives. It is the kind of state where Democrats have to earn their victories. And El-Sayed did something that many party insiders have long insisted could not be done. He ran as a candidate with convictions. He talked about health care, affordability, corporate power, and the need for a government that does not treat ordinary people as an afterthought. He did not present politics as a contest over who could sound the most cautious. He presented it as a fight over who government belongs to. That message connected. It connected because voters understand their own lives. They know what it means to delay going into the doctor because they are worried about the bill. They know what it means to work full-time and still feel as if they are one unexpected expense away from trouble. They know what it means to hear that the economy is doing well while their credit card balance grows and their paycheck disappears before the end of the month. The Democratic Party sometimes makes a mistake when it talks about the economy. It hears criticism and answers with statistics. It hears worry and answers with a chart. It hears anger about inequality and tells people that the right policies are in place, that progress has been made, and that things would be worse under the other party. All of that may be true, but it is not enough. Voters do not want to be told that their anxiety is misplaced. They do not need politicians to explain why they should feel grateful. They need leadership who can look at the country as it is and say, yes, too many people are struggling. Yes, the system has been tilted toward the wealthy and powerful. And yes, government should do something about it. That is what makes El-Sayed's victory important. It is not merely a story about the Democratic Party moving left. It is not just a win for one ideological faction over another. It is a reminder that authenticity has political value. A candidate who speaks clearly about the problems people face can often create a deeper connection. A candidate who sounds polished but distant. The point is not that every Democrat should try to become Abdul El-Sayed. Politics is not a costume. Candidates cannot borrow a populist message, read it off a teleprompter, and expect voters not to notice the difference. The point is that Democrats need to be more serious about the fact that millions of people feel as though the political system is happening to them, not working for them. El-Sayed's victory should be understood as a warning to the Democratic establishment and an opportunity for the Democratic Party. The warning is that voters are losing patience with politics that feels overly managed, overly cautious, and overly dependent on donors, consultants, and party gatekeepers. The opportunity is that Democrats can still build a broad coalition when they speak directly to the frustrations that people carry with them every day. But a primary victory is not the same thing as a general election victory. That is the part Democrats have to understand right now. The primary is over. Abdul El-Sayed is the nominee. The question is whether Michigan Democrats are prepared to behave like a party that understands what is at stake in November. Because the stakes are enormous. This Senate race could help determine control of the United States Senate. It will be expensive, closely watched, and heavily targeted by Republican groups that see an opening in Michigan. El-Sayed will face Mike Rogers, a former Republican congressman with national connections, name recognition, and the full support of a Republican Party that will throw everything it can into winning this seat. Democrats cannot afford a campaign built on wounded feelings and lingering resentment. They cannot afford donors sitting on their hands because their preferred candidate lost. They cannot afford elected officials offering half-hearted endorsements while quietly signaling that they do not believe in the nominee. And they cannot afford activists deciding that the work ends when the primary is over. Unity does not mean pretending there were no differences. There were differences. There were real disagreements over policy, strategy, tone, electability, and the direction of the party. That is normal. A political party should have arguments. A party that never argues is usually a party without energy, ideas, or a future. Democrats should argue about health care. They should argue about labor rights. They should argue about housing, climate change, foreign policy, corporate power, public safety, and how to win back working-class voters. Those arguments are not signs of weakness by themselves. They can be signs of a party that cares about governing and understands that politics involves real choices. But a party also has to know when the argument is over. The voters made their choice. That choice deserves respect. Best path to unity is not to demand that everyone who supported Haley Stevens suddenly become an enthusiastic member of the Abdul El-Sayed fan club. That is neither realistic nor necessary. The goal is to persuade them that whatever differences they have with the nominee, Mike Rogers and the Republican Party are not the answer. Unity means that El-Sayed reaches out to the people who didn't vote for him. It means he listens to their concerns instead of dismissing them. It means he recognizes that voters who backed Haley Stevens may have done so because they worried about electability, because they preferred her approach, because they liked her record, or because they were simply unconvinced by El-Sayed. Those voters should not be treated as enemies. They should be treated as people the campaign needs to win. Unity also means that Haley Stevens, her supporters, and the elected officials who stood with her make a clear and public case for the Democratic nominee. Not a reluctant statement, not a carefully worded social media post, a real case. The primary is over. The nominee is Abdul El-Sayed. The Senate seat matters. The difference between a Democratic Senate and a Republican Senate matters. And sitting out the election is not a neutral act. It means labor leaders, local officials, community organizations, faith leaders, students, and county parties have to do the work that cannot be done through television advertising alone. People are more likely to trust a neighbor, a friend, a coworker, a union steward, or a local organizer than an anonymous political ad. Politics is still personal. People who decide elections are not always following every twist of political news. They do not all watch cable television. They are not all on political social media. Many are busy raising children, working long hours, caring for family members, commuting, trying to pay bills, and doing their best to keep up with a world that has become more expensive and more exhausting. A campaign has to meet people where they are. And Democrats need to stop confusing unity with uniformity. Unity is not everybody saying the exact same thing. Unity is not every Democrat becoming more moderate or more progressive, or more cautious or more confrontational. Unity is people with different views deciding that they share a larger purpose. Michigan's Democratic coalition is broad. It includes union workers who are worried about jobs and wages. It includes Black voters who have been central to Democratic victories for generations. It includes young people concerned about climate change, debt, housing, and democracy. It includes Arab American and Muslim American communities whose political importance has grown substantially. It includes suburban voters who may not use the language of progressivism, but are deeply uncomfortable with extremism and chaos. It includes teachers, nurses, retirees, small business owners, immigrants, public employees, and people who may not see themselves as deeply political at all. They do not all agree on every issue. They never will. But they do share important concerns. They want a government that lowers costs instead of making excuses. They want health care they can afford. They want wages that allow people to live with dignity. They want safe communities and good schools. They want clean water and functioning roads. They want their votes to count. They want corporations and billionaires to play by the same rules as everyone else. They want democracy to mean more than wealthy interests buying influence, while ordinary people are told to wait their turn. These are not radical demands. They are the basic ingredients of a durable political majority. So how does Abdul El-Sayed beat Mike Rogers? First, he has to define the race before Rogers defines him. Rogers will try to make El-Sayed the issue. He will call him too liberal, too extreme, too risky, too far outside the mainstream. That is what Republican campaigns do. They take every complicated policy agreement, reduce it to a scary slogan, and repeat it until journalists start treating the slogan as the whole story. The El-Sayed campaign cannot allow that frame to sit unanswered. The central question of this race should be simple. When powerful interests make life harder for Michigan families, who is actually on their side? That is the fight. Mike Rogers should not be allowed to run as a generic, harmless Midwestern Republican who happens to have some disagreements with Democrats. He is running as part of a national Republican Party that has embraced Donald Trump, placed grievance at the center of its politics, attacked reproductive rights, undermined confidence in elections, and repeatedly chosen the interests of the wealthy over the needs of working people. Rogers has highlighted Trump's endorsement of his campaign. That connection matters. It matters because voters deserve to know what they are choosing. If you support a political movement that creates chaos and calls it strength, you do not get to run as the candidate of stability. If you support a party that repeatedly favors tax policies benefiting the wealthy, you do not get to pose as the champion of affordability. If you support a party that has spent years undermining faith in elections it loses, you do not get to present yourself as a defender of democracy. The message should be direct, but it should not be hysterical. Mike Rogers will say he is on the side of Michigan families. The campaign should ask a basic question. Where has his party stood when it comes to health care, wages, rights, and the power of ordinary people to have a voice in government? That is a question voters can understand. Second, El-Sayed has to make affordability the center of the campaign, not as a side issue, not as one bullet point on a long list. It should be the main idea. Every major policy question should come back to whether Michigan families can afford to live with security and dignity. Healthcare is affordability. Housing is affordability. Childcare is affordability. Prescription drugs are affordability. Energy bills are affordability. College costs are affordability. Retirement is affordability. Good jobs are affordability. The campaign should not talk about these issues in the language of policy papers. It should tell people stories. The worker who cannot afford to miss a shift even when they are sick. The parent who has to choose between a prescription and groceries. The couple that works hard but cannot see a path toward buying a home. The retiree who did everything they were told to do and still worries about whether they can afford to stay in their home. That is the real economy, not a talking point, not an abstraction. The real economy is whether people can breathe financially. For too long, politicians have acted as though people's suffering is simply too complicated to address. It is not always easy to fix, but it is not too complicated to name. And when politicians refuse to name it, voters conclude that those politicians are more interested in protecting a broken system than changing. Third, El-Sayed has to show that he is running to govern, not merely to make a statement. Rogers will argue that El-Sayed is an ideologue. The best answer is not to abandon principle. The best answer is to demonstrate that principle and practical governance are not opposites. A serious campaign can say, we fight for health care because people need it. We fight for clean water because no parent should have to worry about what comes out of the tap. We fight for workers because an economy is not successful if the people doing the work cannot afford to live. We fight corruption because democracy should not be a private club for people with money and connections. That is not ideological theater. That is governing. I'll say its public health background can be useful here. Public health at its best means looking at a community and asking why people are struggling, what is making them sick, what is keeping them from thriving, and what government can do to help. That is a powerful way to talk about politics. A Senate campaign should be about solving problems before they become disasters. It should be about ensuring that a child's future is not determined by their zip code, that a worker's health is not determined by their insurance plan, and that older Americans' retirement is not determined by the greed of a corporation. Fourth, Democrats need to organize everywhere. They cannot just campaign in the places where they already feel comfortable. They cannot only show up in Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, and other Democratic strongholds. They have to show up in smaller cities, working-class suburbs, rural communities, and places where people may be skeptical, but willing to listen. That means real organizing. It means knocking on doors, going to black churches. It means holding events in places where people are not already wearing campaign shirts. It means talking to voters who have been ignored, disappointed, or treated as though their vote is then automatically owed to one party. It means being in union halls, community centers, libraries, diners, local radio stations, houses of worship, schools, and neighborhood gatherings. A statewide campaign cannot be only a brand. It has to be a relationship. People need to feel that somebody sees them. They need to feel that their concerns are not being filtered through consultants in Washington or donors in expensive rooms. They need to believe that their vote is part of something more than another television commercial. And finally, Democrats need confidence, not arrogance, not complacency, confidence. Voters do not want to be scolded into supporting a candidate. They do not want to hear that democracy will end if they fail to do exactly what party leaders tell them. Fear can motivate people for a moment, but it does not build lasting enthusiasm. People want to be inspired. They want to believe their participation can change something. They want to believe that voting is not simply choosing which powerful people will disappoint them less. They want to believe that politics can still be an instrument for making life better. That is the opportunity Abdul El-Sayed has now. His primary victory has already changed the conversation. It has shown that a candidate can speak boldly about health care, corporate power, and the dignity of working people in battleground states. It has shown that voters do not always follow the script written by party insiders. And it has shown that there is a real energy in a campaign willing to tell the truth about the struggles people face. But November will require more than a compelling primary story. It will require unity that is active rather than symbolic. It will require a message that is new, clear, instead of complicated. It will require a campaign that fights for every vote rather than assuming any vote belongs to it. And it will require Democrats to remember a basic truth. The purpose of politics is not to prove that you are right. The purpose of politics is to improve people's lives. If Abdul El-Sayed can keep the campaign centered on that truth, and if Michigan Democrats can set aside old resentments long enough to make the case together, Mike Rogers can be beat. Not because the race will be easy, not because Michigan owes Democrats anything, but because a campaign rooted in working people, economic security, democratic values, and the courage to speak plainly about what is broken still has the power to win. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Thank you for listening. Until next time.